Rosara could barely contain her emotions when she received her son's invitation, a trip to New York, a birthday gift. It wasn't just a glamorous destination, it was a gesture of love, a sign that, finally, she was being seen. She spent days dreaming about the trip, imagining walks through Central Park in the fall, the bright lights of Broadway. She packed her suitcase with care, put on perfume, and wore the necklace she had saved for special occasions. In her heart, there was a joy almost childlike. After all, what mother doesn't dream of being remembered, valued, celebrated? At the airport, everything seemed normal. Her son and daughter-in-law said they would handle the check-in while she waited near the gate. "Don't take too long," she said with a smile, not knowing that would be her last smile that day. 30 minutes went by. Then an hour. People came and went, but she remained there, alone with her suitcase and an uneasy hope. She called once, then again. No answer. She looked around, scanning for a familiar face in a sea of strangers, but everything around her was indifferent. And time, cruel and steady, only confirmed what she didn't want to believe. 3 hours passed before reality hit. This wasn't a delay. It was abandonment. A kind of cruelty that doesn't shout, but silently eats away. A kind of contempt disguised as a gift. And the most painful part, it was premeditated. There was no unexpected event, no miscommunication. It was a decision, and she was the last to know. That's where the deepest pain begins, when you realize you weren't forgotten by accident, but deliberately left behind. What do you do when love turns into an ending, and a gift becomes a trap? And worst of all, she still had no idea what was waiting for her back home. For 40 years, Rosara stitched more than just fabric. She sewed hope, embroidered dreams, and patched hard days with needle and faith. Sitting at her sewing machine, she spent countless hours turning scraps of cloth into party dresses, school uniforms, wedding suits. As the fabric slid under her fingers, her mind imagined a better future. Her son would have a safer home, a good education, a life free from the hardships she had endured. Every stitch was an invisible act of love, every sleepless night, a silent sacrifice in the name of a brighter tomorrow. She never had luxuries, but she learned to live with dignity. She didn't dine out, avoided debt, fixed things instead of buying new. Little by little, with near military discipline, she saved what she could. A few dollars here, a few there, and over time, the years turned into capital. Rosara saved $300,000 through pure effort, no shortcuts, no inheritance, no luck. It was her safety net, her protection for the later years. The kind of achievement only someone who's lived it knows the true cost of. And she believed, with all her heart, that the money also symbolized respect. But what she didn't know, what she could have never imagined, was that her greatest effort would become her greatest vulnerability. The money that was supposed to shield her had turned into bait. At some point, someone looked at that amount not as the fruit of a lifetime, but as an opportunity. And the worst part, that someone lived under her own roof. It's hard to accept that after so many years sowing the future, someone chose to tear it all apart without even looking back. And Rosara still had no idea just how much she was about to lose. At first, Rosara kept smiling at the airport staff, like someone holding on to a sweet secret. Her heart felt light, convinced that the wait was just a small delay, nothing serious. Maybe they were stuck in line, solving a last-minute issue. Maybe they'd gotten lost in procedures, or were just grabbing coffee. She didn't want to look anxious, so she tried to remain composed. She watched people coming and going with their suitcases, families laughing, couples exchanging glances, children clinging to parents, and felt a painful longing for something she never had. But as the clock ticked on, her hope began to dissolve. Rosara looked at her phone every 5 minutes, pressing the screen like persistence could work magic. She sent short messages, then long ones, then fell into silence. No reply. She called, heard the dial tone, then nothing. And in that silence, she began to hear things she had refused to think before. The absence no longer felt like a delay, it felt like a decision. Time, once an ally, had turned into a tormentor. And the hard seat beneath her became an altar of abandonment. At some point, she realized she was being watched. People passed by and noticed the well-dressed elderly woman, sitting still, eyes glassy, clutching her phone. But no one said a word. And it was there, in that setting of indifference, that the truth landed with devastating force. She had been deceived. With premeditation, with coldness, with calculation. The birthday gift was no trip, it was a disguise. And the airport, meant to be the gate to a dream, had become the backdrop to a silent grief. A grief that had no name yet, but that she would carry in her skin for a long time. She looked at Estella with dazed eyes, like someone trying to locate herself in a world turned upside down. "Why?" she murmured. But Estella had no answer. Sometimes, the greatest cruelties come without explanations. They're just shattered mirrors of souls lost along the way. And there Rosaura stood, wounded, but upright. Not out of pride, but out of habit. That's what mothers do, after all, they endure. But this time, enduring wasn't enough. She needed to understand. She needed to find some light, even if faint, just to keep breathing. On the morning of the trip, while Rosaura made coffee with trembling hands, believing she was living one of the happiest days of her life, Raphael had already finished the scam. With access to his mother's bank account, something she allowed out of trust and naivete, he made transfers that drained almost everything she had saved over 40 years. He did it with cold precision, without a hint of hesitation. While she set the breakfast table and folded travel clothes, he was typing passwords. Every click was a betrayal. And the cruelest part, he knew she still trusted him like the little boy she once cradled in her arms. The money that disappeared wasn't just numbers, it was meaning. It was sleepless nights, calloused fingers, medicine denied to keep saving, birthdays sacrificed, dreams postponed. It was everything. Rosaura wasn't a millionaire, but that amount was her passport to a dignified old age, her shield against loneliness, her emotional safety net, a promise that, even alone, she'd have independence. Raphael knew that. Patricia knew too. And still, they executed the plan as if they were solving a minor inconvenience. As if a mother's pain could be dismissed with a casual, "She's strong." The most devastating part was realizing the level of coldness behind it all. Raphael knew she would never suspect. He knew her, knew she was loyal, simple, a believer in goodness. And he used all of that against her. He kissed her forehead, smiled over breakfast, kindly carried her suitcase. He masked poison with affection, crime with tenderness. And when she stepped out of the car at the airport, feeling loved, he was already free, walking away with everything that belonged to her. It was a financial blow, yes. But what truly hurt was the emotional betrayal. On the phone screen, the numbers flashed like silent punches. $240,000 gone in minutes. 6 transfers. 4 decades of sacrifice reduced to clicks. Rosaura scrolled through the statement, stunned. Spa in Aspen. 5-star hotel. Rooftop dinner. First-class flights. What took her a lifetime to build, Raphael and Patricia were burning through in less than a week. And the most perverse part, they were doing it with the same money she had saved thinking of their future. It was as if she had funded her own destruction. Every line on that bank statement was a fresh wound. Not because of the value, but because of what it represented. She didn't see numbers. She saw nights spent sewing through back pain, celebrations skipped, shoes never bought, silent sacrifices. She saw her youth invested in love, now turned into luxury for 2 ungrateful people. Rosaura trembled. She didn't know if it was rage, sorrow, or just her body trying to make sense of what her soul already knew. There was no going back. What had been stolen wasn't just money, it was trust, memory, meaning. With teary eyes, she let the phone slide onto her lap. The tears fell quietly, soaking the screen as if trying to wash away reality. And there, on that airport bench, she understood something no mother ever wants to feel. Her son didn't love her the way she believed. The son she raised, protected, and defended had discarded her like a burden. And in that moment, the most painful balance wasn't in the bank, it was in her soul, zeroed out. She was empty, exhausted, lost. But fate still had something in store for her, something she could never have predicted. Estella couldn't hide her outrage. As she read the bank statement and listened to the story unfold, her eyes burned, not with sadness but with fury. "This isn't neglect. This is flat-out theft," she said, her voice unwavering. She wasn't family, wasn't a lifelong friend. She was just someone who refused to look away. But in that moment, she took on the role Raphael had abandoned, the role of someone who cares. And with the same strength she once used to protect her own children, she began to act. Because sometimes, what saves us isn't blood, it's the courage to care. While Rosaura was still trying to gather her broken pieces, Estella was already building a plan. She grabbed paper, jotted down names, gave instructions on how to block accounts, report fraudulent activity, and change passwords. She listed which agencies to contact, which lawyers to consult, how to gather evidence. She was practical, direct, with no space for self-pity. But her strength wasn't cold, it was protective. Like a nurse who presses hard on a wound to stop the bleeding. For the first time since the pain began, Rosaura felt an anchor steadying her drifting boat. Someone who wouldn't let her sink again. You still have value, Rosaura. You still have a story, dignity, and time. This is not your ending. Estella's words entered like an antidote. They didn't heal everything, but they slowed the poison. It was strange to trust someone so new, but sometimes, a stranger is exactly who God sends to lift us up. And there, in the same airport where everything had been taken from her, something was starting to be returned. The sense that even in the lowest pit, it's possible to find a steady hand. And Estella would be that hand. Without promising anything, she was already doing everything. In the middle of the chaos, a memory flickered like a candle in the dark. Years ago, Rosaura had opened a second bank account. Small, discreet, known to no one, not even Raphael. She did it out of instinct, more precaution than mistrust. A little money tucked away, just in case. She never imagined that day would come like this. When she opened the app, she saw the balance, $30,000. It wasn't enough to change her life, but it was enough to keep her off the streets. It was hope. It was what remained. And it was everything. Estella looked at the screen and let out a breath of relief. That changed everything. With that money, Rosaura could rebuild, make decisions independently, and no longer depend on anyone's pity. It was like finding a lifeboat in the middle of a shipwreck. With the practicality of someone who had already overcome much, Estella started mapping a plan. We're going to protect this money. We'll invest it wisely. This is your foundation now. And she spoke with such conviction that, for the first time, Rosaura believed. Not just in the idea of starting over, but in herself. That savings account wasn't just financial. It symbolized something much deeper, the part of Rosaura that had never been manipulated or broken. It was the piece of her that still made choices, that still knew how to protect herself. It wasn't luck, it was intuition. Wisdom disguised as caution, now revealing itself as salvation. And as she stared at that modest balance, Rosaura understood. Sometimes what saves us isn't what we have in abundance. It's what we had the wisdom to hide, untouched, even when everything else is stripped away. Some wounds never heal, but they set us free. Sitting in silence, her eyes still swollen, Rosaura began to revisit old memories. Raphael's subtle cruelties. Forgotten birthdays. The time she gave in, stayed quiet, erased herself, all in the name of love. She had always believed that one day her sacrifice would be recognized. But now, with the truth laid bare, something inside her shattered, and something even deeper emerged. Raphael had never truly valued her. Never saw her for who she was. And that realization, as cruel as it was, marked a turning point. A child's betrayal is a wound the world doesn't know how to name. But Rosaura realized that as long as she kept feeding the illusion, she herself was the one blocking her freedom. She was trapped in the hope of affection that never came, living for a kind of emotional return that never existed. And when that fantasy collapsed, what remained was solid ground, bare, but clean. For the first time, there were no more excuses, no more justifications. She could finally stop trying to be loved and start loving herself. The pain that once crushed her was now pushing her forward, not backward, but ahead. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself, as if sealing a pact, "Now, it's for me." It felt strange, almost forbidden. She had spent her entire life living for others, carrying guilt, caretaking, self-denial. But in that moment, something shifted. Rosaura understood. Self-care is not selfishness, it's survival. And it began with the smallest acts: eating on time, walking under the sun, reading a book, cutting ties that hurt. It still hurt, of course. But something new was sparking. And maybe, just maybe, she was being born again. Estella was determined. With a phone in one hand and a form in the other, she guided Rosaura firmly, yet gently. "Now you're going to block everything. Cards, accounts, access. They don't touch anything of yours anymore." And Rosaura followed, still trembling, still processing the avalanche that had swallowed her whole. But something was changing. In the middle of the pain, between one phone call and the next, she began to see herself differently. As someone who, even wounded, was fighting back. She was no longer the woman abandoned at the airport. She was the woman who, even after falling, was now getting back on her feet. With each step, she reclaimed a piece of herself. Canceling cards wasn't just a practical action anymore, it was symbolic. It was like saying, "Not here. Not anymore." Reporting the transfers meant exposing a truth she had denied for years. Estella handled every detail with precision, but the decisions were Rosaura's. And that made all the difference. The woman who once depended on her son for everything was now signing papers, filing complaints, and saying no with a voice that had only ever known how to give in. The storm still raged around her, but the center was beginning to hold. That newfound strength didn't come out of nowhere. It had always been there, buried beneath guilt, fear, and a lifelong habit of putting herself last. The sharp pain of abandonment was, ironically, what allowed her to finally hear her own voice. An old, steady voice that said, "You are still alive. You still can." And as Estella filled out the final section of the report, Rosaura gave a faint smile. Not from relief, but from clarity. For the first time, she didn't need anyone to save her. What she needed, and what she was now doing, was saving herself. Alone in the bedroom, her head resting against the window as the sun set outside, Rosaura began replaying the past few years in her mind. How had she not seen it sooner? The signs had been there all along: Raphael's growing distance, the long silences on the phone, the increasingly rare visits. That one dinner when Patricia asked, with a forced smile, if Rosaura had a joint account. Or the time she caught her son rummaging through old papers in the office. It all made sense now, painfully too late. She realized she had ignored all the red flags because deep down, she didn't want to lose the fragile connection that still existed. Loving Raphael had been like walking on a road full of cracks, and she had preferred not to look down, afraid she'd fall. Now she understood, that blind love came with a price. And she paid it with every penny, every illusion, every excuse she made for her son's coldness. Rosaura hadn't been naive out of ignorance, she had been hopeful. Because a mother's love sometimes chooses denial over truth. But something shifted that day. She looked back, not with rage, but with a piercing clarity. The red flags now screamed within her, not as guilt, but as hard-earned wisdom. It was no longer about reclaiming lost money, it was about reclaiming her dignity. Rosaura knew that from now on, she would pay attention to the signs, in every relationship. Because loving someone should never mean erasing yourself. And she would never again let emotional blindness drag her into such a deep hole. She had woken up. And she would not go back to sleep. The phone trembled in Rosaura's hands, but she didn't hesitate. She dialed the bank's number with her eyes fixed on the wall in front of her, as if needing something solid to keep her standing. When the representative, Lydia, answered, Rosaura's voice came out trembling, broken, but filled with something new: outrage. "There was a transfer. Without my permission. It was my own son," she said, barely audible. On the other end, respectful silence. Lydia listened closely to every word as Rosaura, heartbroken, described the scheme orchestrated inside her own home. And as she spoke, something rose up within her, a strength born from pain, but also from a decision. Rosaura wasn't just reporting a banking crime. She was reporting the theft of her own life, her trust, the story of a mother who loved too much and was betrayed by those who should have protected her. When Lydia confirmed the transfers had indeed been made to Raphael and Patricia's accounts, Rosaura closed her eyes. A single tear ran down her cheek, not from weakness, but from liberation. She wasn't silent anymore. And that changed everything. Lydia began the process of freezing the funds, warning it wouldn't be easy. Still, Rosaura felt more alive than she had in years. For the first time in a long time, she was fighting for herself. Every word spoken during that call was like a stone laid in the foundation of a new woman. A woman who had been hurt, yes, but who now chose to rebuild herself. Not based on promises made by others, but on truth, even if that truth hurt. Because truth sets you free. And Rosaura was finally starting to set herself free. In the quiet of Estella's living room, between sips of coffee and knowing glances, a new idea began to take shape. Recovering what was lost wasn't enough. She needed to face the truth, head-on. Estella suggested something bold: track Raphael and Patricia, gather evidence, expose them. Show the world what they had done. Rosaura listened in silence, her heart beating faster. For a moment, she wondered, is this revenge? But then she understood. No. It's justice. Emotional justice. For the first time, those who hurt her would have to look in the mirror. This decision doesn't come from anger, it comes from clarity. Rosaura no longer wants to destroy anyone, but she also refuses to be destroyed. For years, she brushed everything under the rug in the name of family peace. She stayed quiet, looked the other way, gave in. Not anymore. With Estella's help, she starts piecing the puzzle together. Bank statements, messages, records. Each new piece confirms she's not crazy. She was manipulated. And that needs to be said out loud. No more swallowing what hurts. Rosaura approves the plan with a firm nod. For the first time, there will be consequences. Not to feed hate, but to honor the truth. Will Raphael and Patricia feel shame? Maybe. But that's not the goal, just a fair result. She's not seeking revenge. She wants repair. And that makes all the difference. Rosaura no longer wants to wound, she wants to heal. And on this new path she's choosing, justice will walk beside her, not fear. Rosaura can picture the scene with cruel clarity. Raphael in an expensive suit, surrounded by sycophants, snapping his fingers at a waiter with arrogance. He orders the most expensive champagne, certain that luxury will shield him from truth. But when he hands over the card, the response is cold and simple: transaction declined. The awkward silence, the eyes around the table, the shame creeping across his face. For the first time, the man who always held control loses his ground. And Rosaura, on the other side of the city, feels something unfamiliar: serene satisfaction. It's not pleasure in someone else's pain. It's poetic justice. Life paying back in the same currency. Not money, but the disdain, arrogance, and coldness Raphael once used against her. Rosaura didn't lift a finger to make that scene happen, but by standing firm, she allowed the universe to realign the pieces. What once would have broken her now strengthens her. And she understands, the pain is still there, but it no longer commands her. It's the beginning of balance. After swallowing so much humiliation in silence, seeing the truth rise naturally, without shouting, without scandal, tastes bittersweet. Rosaura doesn't want her son to suffer. But she won't sacrifice herself for him anymore either. Life is ironic like that. Sometimes justice arrives discreetly, elegantly, almost symbolically. And in that single gesture of a declined card, the universe seems to whisper, "Now, it's your turn to rise." Estella walks in with a new revelation, as if delivering the final piece of the puzzle. Raphael and Patricia are in Miami, staying in the presidential suite, paying $45,000 a night. Rosaura freezes, not from shock, but from the sheer absurdity. The tropical paradise, with its crystal-clear waters and five-star service, was funded with the blood, sweat, and naivete of a betrayed mother. Every detail of that extravagance screams humiliation. She takes a deep breath. Her heart races, not with despair, but with focused indignation. It's no longer scattered pain with no direction. It's a concentrated, lucid fury that finally knows where to aim. Rosaura feels the bitter taste of truth. While she was counting coins to buy medicine, they were toasting at sunset with sparkling wine and empty promises. Patricia beams in social media posts, smiles paid for with the dignity they ripped from Rosaura. But now, everything has changed. Rosaura is no longer a naive woman or a silent victim. She sees it clearly. This isn't just a financial blow, it's symbolic. An assault on her story, her love, her trust. And as she stares at the photo of the luxury suite, Rosaura doesn't feel envy, she feels purpose. That's where she'll flip the script. The paradise bought with hell's money will become the stage for the first reversal. Because now, she's the one in control. Estella, eyes burning and phone in hand, shares one more detail. Raphael and Patricia have a confirmed reservation at the resort's most exclusive restaurant that evening. Oceanfront table. 7-course tasting menu. Dom Perignon included. Rosaura closes her eyes for a moment. The image is vivid, the two of them, dressed to impress, smiling between sips and gourmet dishes paid for with money she spent a lifetime earning. Something inside her turns cold, not from grief, but from burning indignation. That dinner, once just another whim, now takes on a new meaning. Rosaura doesn't see luxury, she sees mockery. As if every bite they take is a slap in her face. As if every toast is a laugh at her pain. She can no longer watch from a distance. She won't let life move on as if nothing happened. Not while they keep mocking her generosity. Not when the main course that night is impunity. With calm eyes and a steady voice, Rosaura tells Estella, "No more waiting. It's time to stand up." For the first time, she's not acting on impulse, but with cold strategy. That fancy dinner will become the stage for the beginning of their downfall. And if there's one thing Rosaura has learned these past few days, it's that pain becomes a powerful ally when paired with truth and courage. Tonight, the reckoning begins, and she'll be there, standing, looking straight into the eyes of those who underestimated her. Ever meticulous, Estella presents what she calls the menu of emotional justice. 3 different ways to strike Raphael and Patricia where it hurts the most. Their ego, their image, their illusion of control. The first is simple and sharp. Let the card be declined at the peak of the dinner, with waiters watching and other diners whispering. The second is more direct. A late-night phone call, with Rosaura saying a single sentence that shatters their peace. The third is more subtle, more unsettling. Anonymous messages, full of cryptic lines like, "The mask will fall," or "What was stolen will be revealed." Rosaura listens silently, but her eyes burn with fire. For the first time, she feels power over her own story. This isn't revenge, she knows that. It's a cry for dignity. She doesn't choose one plan. She chooses all 3. Because the pain she felt wasn't small, and she doesn't want Raphael and Patricia just to be caught off guard. She wants them to feel the ground tremble before the fall. To feel that chill down their spine, that doubt eating away at their confidence. She wants them to wonder who knows, who's watching, who saw everything. The plan begins that very afternoon. Estella programs the bank alerts. Rosaura crafts the messages with surgical precision. And the call, oh, that will be the final blow, delivered at just the right time. She's not chasing scandal for scandal's sake. She's pursuing emotional justice, in the most poetic, symbolic way possible. By turning every step they take on stolen money into a countdown. And now, for the first time, the clock is ticking in Rosaura's favor. In the stillness of the presidential suite, amid the glow of the lights and the distant sound of the waves, Raphael and Patricia's phones began to vibrate. Short, sharp messages with an unsettling tone, as if they came from the hotel itself, a silent and cutting warning. The first was direct but loaded with meaning. "Mothers aren't as naive as you think." The phrase seemed simple, yet it carried a weight that made the two exchange suspicious glances. Who was behind this? And why? Before they could process the message, another arrived, even sharper. Stolen money doesn't taste so sweet, does it? A heavy silence fell over the room. The luxury around them became almost suffocating, for now the invisible presence of someone who knew too much was there, rattling their nerves. Paranoia, once distant, began to seep in, making them watch every shadow, mistrust every whisper. The psychological game had begun, and there was no escape. Estella, on the other end of the line, watched everything calmly, fully aware of the impact each word would carry. She wasn't seeking destruction, but balance. The art of paranoia, applied with precision, was the most effective weapon. Rosaura felt a quiet satisfaction, a new sense of power, as if, for the first time, she was in control of a destiny that once seemed lost. The house of cards Raphael and Patricia had built was starting to shake, and this was only the beginning. Sitting on her porch, Rosaura gazed at the sky. But it wasn't the same look as before, the one marked by pain, abandonment, and disbelief. Something inside her had changed irreversibly. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a victim. She was no longer the woman deceived, robbed, and despised by her own son. Now, she was the author of the story. And this story demanded emotional justice, not just the return of material things, but settling the invisible debts, pain for pain. Rosaura realized what she wanted most wasn't to get back the furniture, the money, or the house. She wanted Raphael to taste the bitter sting of anxiety, the pit in the stomach from uncertainty, the feeling of being unprotected. She wanted him to feel abandonment, not as punishment, but as a mirror. It was a symbolic reckoning, an emotional payback for what was taken from her without mercy. And now, finally, she held the reins. The woman who always gave in, who stayed silent to keep the peace, had become the central piece on a carefully arranged board. In that moment, Rosaura felt no guilt. She felt power. Not the destructive power of revenge, but the power of restoration. The power of emotional justice that rebalances a story violently twisted. As the sun dipped below the horizon, she breathed deeply and thought, "This is how you start over. Not with tears, but with courage." The Rosaura Raphael knew died at the airport. The one now walking toward the resort's restaurant was alive and ready. Estella calmly dialed the hotel's number. On the other end, a courteous receptionist answered and confirmed the call could be transferred to the presidential suite. Rosaura, sitting on the edge of the bed with the phone in her hand, felt her heart race, but her eyes stayed steady. When the transfer tone rang, she took a deep breath. Estella silently held her hand. The silent war about to erupt began with a simple, "Hello." On the other end, Raphael's voice sounded light, almost childlike. "Hello. Good morning, this is Raphael." That careless, relaxed tone, paid for by the sweat of his mother's hands, hit Rosaura like an emotional punch in the stomach. But she didn't flinch. With a firm, measured voice, she replied, "Hello, son." And then time froze. Silence. A silence so dense it could be cut with a knife. Raphael said nothing. His breathing changed. The relaxed tone vanished like smoke before the fire of awareness. On the other end of the line, Rosaura heard the abyss open. At that moment, Raphael understood the charade was over. The game, once comfortable, had turned into a maze he didn't know how to escape. The mother he thought would never react was now there, alive and clear-headed, at the center of his worst nightmare. And it all started with two simple words. Words that once meant comfort, and now meant confrontation. Raphael's voice trembled slightly, trying to keep control. "How did you get this number?" On the other end, Rosaura allowed no hesitation. Her reply was a blade. "The real question is, how did you get access to my 248,000 this morning?" The silence that followed wasn't just awkward, it was devastating. Raphael held his breath. For the first time, he realized he wasn't speaking to the passive, blind mother he once knew. He was facing a woman who had awakened. Rosaura didn't shout. She didn't have to. Her coldness weighed heavier than any scandal. On the other end, Patricia whispered softly, Who is this? Raphael didn't answer. His mind raced in circles, searching for an escape that didn't exist. He had tried to use Rosara's name, her information, her trust. And now he was cornered by the deadliest weapon of all, the truth spoken calmly. He knew he was about to be exposed, and had nowhere to hide. You used my kindness as a password, Raphael, Rosara said slowly. But you were wrong to think it was eternal. Each word was like a sentence. His silence was already a confession. Patricia watched her husband's face turn pale. There was no escape. The luxuries surrounding them suddenly felt suffocating. And for the first time, Rosara was no longer the victim of betrayal. She was the author of judgment. Rosara called again. This time, no introduction, no pleasantries. Just silence from her. The kind of silence that forces the other to reveal themselves. Raphael answered with a shaky voice. Mom, I can explain. But every word came out disjointed, weak, soaked in guilt. He tried to make excuses, mixed up dates, twisted facts. And Patricia whispered hurried instructions in the background, as if trying to guide him through a minefield already ablaze. Rosara listened silently, until she decided to intervene. You paid for the restaurant reservation yesterday at 4 o'clock with my card. The same one you said you lost 2 weeks ago. I have the receipt. Her voice doesn't rise, but her tone carries something even more unsettling. Sarcasm. Oh, Raphael. You've always struggled with numbers. But this one, you were quick, huh? On the other end, panic is palpable. The son who always controlled the narrative now barely breathes. He tries to retort, it was a misunderstanding, I just wanted to. But his words tangle in their own lies. Rosara then cuts him off with a sharp line. You didn't know I could be this efficient when I decide to wake up, did you? The call doesn't end with shouting, but with something far more powerful, the dry sound of a son tumbling down from his own arrogance. Raphael's collapse begins right then, the exact moment he realizes his mother is no longer a fragile figure, and the truth is coming at full force. Rosara stands by the bedroom window. The sky is clear, but inside her, a perfectly controlled storm rages. The phone still in her hand, on the other end, Raphael tries to recover. Mom, you gave me access to your account, remember? I only used it because I trusted that. But she cuts him off. Not with a scream, not with tears, but with the surgical precision of someone who finally understands the game. Access for emergencies, Raphael. Emergencies. Not to pay for French champagne while you abandon me in a musty room with empty promises. He falls silent, choked by his own shame. Patricia whispers something in the background, but Rosara remains unmoved. I saw the spa reservation. I saw the seafood order with lobster. I saw the luxury car rental. All in my name. You know what's worse? I let it happen. Because until yesterday, I still thought you were my son. The last sentence isn't shouted. It's spoken so calmly that the pain spreads like poison, slow, sure, and irreversible. On the other end, Raphael begins to plead. His arrogance disappears. He calls Mom with the voice of a scared child, trying to reclaim a childhood he himself destroyed. But Rosara is no longer the woman he manipulated. She's not hurt, she's awake. And in this silent awakening, she takes, for the first time in years, full control of her own life. The power has changed hands. And Rosara has no intention of giving it back. At the five-star hotel restaurant table, Raphael and Patricia try to keep up appearances. They wear expensive clothes, but the sweat on Raphael's neck betrays his nervousness. The waiter brings the check with a polite smile. Raphael hands over the card with an automatic nod, sure of his own power. Seconds later, the same waiter returns, embarrassed. Mr. Raphael. Declined. He forces a smile and hands over another card. And another. And another. All, one by one, declined. Patricia starts squirming in her chair. Raphael is pale. Glances around them begin to accumulate, first discreet, then blatant. Murmurs take over the dining room. A manager approaches, polite but firm. "Is there another form of payment, sir?" Raphael swallows hard, looks around as if searching for an exit that doesn't exist. The feeling of control slips through his fingers. Luxury turns into prison. Status becomes public ruin. The scene is witnessed by guests, employees, even tourists filming discreetly. Patricia whispers angrily, "What's happening?" But Raphael has no answers. The man who mocked his own mother now can't pay for dinner. Rosaura, silent, starts her revenge with precision. Not with shouts, but with exposure. Shame is served as the main course. And the taste is bitter as never before. When Raphael and Patricia open the hotel room door, they find no peace. In the center of the bed rests an envelope. White, elegant, with both their names handwritten by someone who knows their wounds. Patricia hesitates, but Raphael tears it open with trembling fingers. Inside, a few lines written with a coldness sharper than any scream. "The humiliation you felt tonight is only a small taste of what it means to be betrayed by someone you love." The silence that follows is sepulchral. Patricia breaks down in tears. Raphael, not knowing where to hide, paces like a cornered animal. His mind tries to process what's happening, but the reality is brutal. He's been unmasked, disarmed, and now stripped of power. The pain of being exposed, not by a public scandal, but by a precise and intimate message, consumes him. Between sobs, Patricia asks, "Is she going to destroy us?" But Raphael doesn't answer. He's defeated, not by the bank blocks or the restaurant scandal, but by conscience, that voice he had ignored until now. Across the city, Rosaura watches the sky from the window of her new room. She feels no pleasure in their suffering, but neither pity. She feels something rarer and deeper, empathy for herself. For the woman who stayed silent for years, who was diminished, exploited, and discarded. Now, with serenity and firmness, she understands. Justice can also have the face of dignity. And sometimes, all a woman needs is to stop apologizing for standing up. The phone rings in the heavy silence of the room. Raphael answers with trembling hands, expecting more venom, more punishment. But the voice on the other end doesn't shout. It's calm, firm, strangely serene. "I'm not calling to humiliate you. I'm calling so you listen." Patricia grabs his arm and puts the phone on speaker. Rosaura then begins to speak, describing in painfully clear detail the moment at the airport. The forgotten suitcase, the sudden silence, the diverted glances. "You left me there like someone abandoning an old animal. And I still looked back, hoping it was a mistake." Raphael puts his hands to his face. Patricia starts sobbing. Rosaura's words don't come as arrows, but as mirrors. And in that mirror, they see the cowardice they committed. She continues, "What you're feeling now, loss, fear, shame, is exactly what I felt. Only I had nowhere to go back to. And unlike you, I didn't cause any of this." For the first time, there were no excuses, no defenses. Just a silence heavy with shame and regret. Rosaura took a deep breath. "No, I don't forgive you. Forgiveness takes time, and maybe it never comes. But today, I free myself. From fear. From guilt. And most of all, from you." And she hung up. Not in anger, but with the calm of someone who has finally closed a chapter. On the other end of the line, only two broken souls remained. On this side, a woman was born whole. From the other side, Rosaura heard something she never expected. Patricia asked to speak. Her voice was shaky, fragile, almost unrecognizable. "I know I was wrong. I knew what I was doing, and yet I kept going." Rosaura was silent for a moment. Raphael tried to interrupt, babbling excuses, blaming stress, work, the pressures. But Rosaura would have none of it. "Do you think stress justifies cowardice? For 40 years, Raphael, I worked twice as hard so you could have everything. You never knew what it meant to give up your own life to support someone else's." The pain she had held for decades now came out pure and raw, no shouting, just truth. She recalled nights sewing until her fingers bled, bills paid with sweat, dinners skipped so her son could have new shoes. I held this family together with both hands. And you let me fall into the abyss with a smile on your face. Patricia cried quietly. Raphael did too. But Rosaura was not looking for tears, she sought awareness. Then came the last blow, the revelation of debts. You didn't just betray me with ingratitude. You betrayed me with lies. A mortgage behind, 5 maxed-out credit cards, and you pretended to live a life you couldn't afford. It was the collapse. A family drama exploded like a bomb, not just emotional betrayal, but financial ruin, irresponsibility, despair. Patricia admitted everything. Raphael finally saw what he had become. And Rosaura closed the case. Not with vengeance, but with justice. With a firm voice and determined gaze, Rosaura took control of the conversation. No room for yelling, no tears, only clarity about what must be. She declared with surgical precision, "You will feel the abandonment you caused me, on your skin. This isn't just about money, it's about dignity." Each word echoed like a sentence, breaking the silence that had long been complicit in the betrayal. She continued without hesitation. The $248,000 will be returned, with interest and correction. I won't accept less. This is not a negotiation, it's justice. The reply on the other end was lost in murmurs, but Rosaura didn't flinch. She didn't just want to get back what was taken, she wanted to make sure this lesson was etched forever. Beyond that, you will never again have access to my accounts, my assets, or my decisions. My life is mine, and that's how it will stay. This moment marked more than just a financial settlement, it was the reclaiming of the autonomy that had been stolen from her. Rosaura wasn't just recovering money, she was freeing herself from emotional captivity and manipulation. With this resolve, she closed the door on the past and opened a window to a future where she sets the rules, where her worth is recognized and respected. And in that silent power, a new era began for her. In the quiet of the call, Patricia dared to ask in a trembling voice, "Can we be a family again?" It was a question full of hope, fear, and a silent plea for forgiveness. But Rosaura didn't answer with soft words or empty promises. She said firmly, almost as if closing a door forever, "I don't know. The woman who believed in you died today." It was a full stop to the old story, a chapter ending in pain, but also promising something new. This statement was not meant to hurt, but to mark a rebirth. Rosaura didn't seek revenge, nor did she want to keep wounds open. She was free from the naivety that blinded her, from the trust placed in those who didn't deserve it. In that moment, a new woman was born, stronger, wiser, and above all, free. It was the death of a past that held her captive and the birth of an emotional freedom that depended on no one. She made it clear the future was uncertain, but from that moment on, the rules had changed. That bond of blind love was broken, making way for a new way of being, one where respect, autonomy, and truth are non-negotiable. Rosaura now walks on her own feet, steady, without looking back, knowing that if anything is to bloom, it will be in new, fertile ground. 3 months have passed since the confrontation that changed everything. Rosaura now lives in a simple house, but entirely hers. Every corner of that home reflects her new life, walls painted in vibrant colors, plants she tends herself, and an aura of freedom that once seemed impossible. It's not luxury that defines this space, but the fact that it's hers, earned through the strength of her own determination. Every detail is a silent testimony to the woman who rose from the ashes. Estella, who has stood by her from the beginning, has become more than a friend. She's the sister Rosaura always wanted. Together they share laughter, plans, and the support that was so often missing in the past. This friendship strengthens Rosaura, reminding her daily that even when everything seems lost, it's possible to find light and genuine connection. Art and color permeate her routine, turning even the grayest days into moments of expression and healing. Contact with Raphael and Patricia has changed completely. Now, they come only by appointment, respecting the boundaries Rosaura firmly set. She controls what she accepts and what she won't tolerate, and this stance enforces limits that never existed before. There's no more room for abuse or betrayal. The power, finally, is in her hands, and it shows in the calm she radiates, like someone who knows that after the storm comes the peace you choose to live by. Aurora, the friend from the bank who became a pillar in Rosaura's life, asks gently one day over shared coffee, "Have you forgiven them?" The question is not simple. It carries the weight of years of pain and disappointment. Rosaura smiles serenely, her eyes steady and wise. "It's not about forgiveness," she answers slowly. "It's about protecting myself." That sentence carries the full meaning of the transformation she's lived. Not surrender, but an act of self-love and strength. She explains that forgiveness can be a path, but it's not the only one. Sometimes, the most important thing is setting boundaries, preserving your peace, and making sure what hurt you no longer holds power over you. Rosaura learned that protecting her heart is not weakness, but one of the greatest acts of courage a person can have. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, but deciding not to let the past dictate my future, she adds, showing the way for anyone feeling trapped in pain. This conversation with Aurora reveals the heart of Rosaura's story. She did not give up her dignity. On the contrary, she reclaimed it, living by her own terms, with autonomy and respect. Her example inspires not only overcoming betrayal but rewriting one's own narrative, becoming the protagonist of one's life. It is this strength that drives Rosaura, and that can move anyone willing to learn from her journey. Now, Rosaura lives with renewed energy. The canvases she paints are more than simple works of art, they are expressions of her soul, colorful fragments of her journey through healing. With every brushstroke, she releases old pain and makes room for hope to bloom. This visible transformation inspires everyone around her. Her art is not just a hobby, but an act of healing and deep expression, showing that even after the storm, beauty can be created. Beyond painting, Rosaura dedicates her time to teaching other women who have faced similar hardships. With patience and wisdom, she shares not only techniques but stories of strength and resilience. She has become a mentor, a guide who lights paths once shrouded in darkness. Her words and actions carry power because they come from genuine experience, the experience of falling, rising, and choosing to flourish against all odds. She is no longer the abandoned, betrayed woman who was once left alone at the airport. Today, Rosaura is a living symbol of rebirth. She shows that even in the face of the deepest pain, there is space for rebuilding and creating a greater purpose. Her life is an invitation for other women to find their voice, claim their power, and write their own chapters, with courage and freedom. One quiet afternoon, the phone rings. Rosaura answers calmly, without rush. On the other end, Raphael's voice sounds hesitant, almost childlike. He announces, "Patricia is pregnant. A girl. They want to name her Hope." The choice of name feels heavy with symbolism, or a bid for redemption. But Rosaura, now wise and awake, recognizes the difference between genuine affection and emotional manipulation. She listens quietly, neither responding with enthusiasm nor coldness. When she finally speaks, her voice is gentle but firmer than ever. "I hope you're better parents than you were children." There are no screams, no spilled resentments or visible bitterness. Just the maturity of someone who learned to protect herself, and now communicates without needing to hurt, but also without silence. With this reply, Rosaura doesn't close doors. But she makes it clear that any reconciliation will happen on her terms, not theirs. She will no longer be a hostage to others' expectations or a bridge for their conscience relief. For the first time in decades, she holds the power, and chooses to use it with dignity, clarity, and freedom. On the porch of her new home, painting the last canvas of the day, Rosaura allows herself a pause. The silence around her is not loneliness, it's peace. As she watches colors come to life on the canvas, she reflects on the woman she used to be. The one who begged for crumbs of recognition, who bent herself to keep the family together, who silenced her own desires to please others. That woman is dead. The new Rosaura doesn't live to prove anything to anyone. She lives for herself. For her light days, her conscious choices, her hard-won freedom. She no longer seeks applause or wounds herself over criticism. She no longer measures herself by others' eyes, she demands respect simply for existing. And, without meaning to, she has become a beacon. Other women begin seeking her out, inspired by the quiet strength she radiates. She feels no hatred. She harbors no grudges. She feels something far more powerful, a serene indifference toward the past and a deep satisfaction with the present. She finally understood that justice is not revenge, it's balance. And that rebirth is not forgetting what happened, but choosing what you will no longer allow to repeat. At 67 years old, Rosaria finally discovered what it means to truly live. Her mornings begin with freshly brewed coffee and shared laughter with Estella. Then comes painting, not out of obligation, but for pleasure. In the afternoon, she volunteers at the women's shelter she helped found. At night, she sometimes dances alone in the living room, sometimes reads. And in all these moments, there is a quiet certainty. She is exactly where she's meant to be. Her schedule is no longer filled with family demands, forced visits, or roles imposed without choice. Now, every commitment is a yes given from the heart. The betrayal, cruel as it was, did not destroy her. On the contrary, it freed Rosaria from an emotional prison she had kept locked herself, fueled by guilt, fear, and dependence. She doesn't deny the past, but she no longer lives under its weight. She discovered that it's never too late to start over, and sometimes, life's greatest gift comes disguised as pain. Her freedom didn't come from others. It came from within. And with it, a whole woman was born, strong and at peace with her own story.